Well, good afternoon, everyone. I can tell from the buzz in the room, there's excitement in the room. I'm certainly feeling it, and I'm so happy to have you with us. You know, it may be a little bit misty outside, but there's a lot of sunshine in this room. So great. Welcome to today's symposium, Creative Alliances, Navigating Cultural Diplomacy at the Intersection of Business and the Arts. What a wonderful title. Yes. I am Juanita Hardy, and I am chair of the International Arts and Artists, and they are one of today's co-hosts. Thank you all for coming. The goal of today's symposium is to help unite the businesses, government, and social sectors in the appreciation and the preservation of our global shared heritage. And I think this is a really important point when there's so much discussion about fractured and division. There is so much in common that we share. And this is a focus on how we bring that unity and that commonality together, the ways in which we can pursue this. We have a sparkling lineup of individuals in the international art, diplomacy, finance, media professionals who will help us make sense of this. So our format for today, we'll begin with our first panel, and that panel will focus on the preservation and accessibility of our shared cultural and artistic heritage. So we'll begin there, and that will be followed by our keynote, who will talk about the role of art museums in creating a sense of belonging and supporting cultural diplomacy. And then we'll wrap up with our second panel, and they will speak about the potential of public-private partnerships in cultural diplomacy to bridge divides and foster global unity. And you have this, all of the details of the agenda you can get through the QR code, which you all should have in hand. If you don't, raise your hand and someone will make sure you get it. But before we continue, some thank yous. Today's event is hosted under the auspices of the Italian Embassy. We're deeply grateful to the Italian Embassy for their support. I would like to recognize Joel Melchiori. I hope I have that name correct. Please forgive me if not, for representing the embassy. And could Joel Melchiori, thank you. Thank you so much, Renato. Are they here? Could they just make themselves known to us? Okay. I would also like to thank our partners, the diplomatic Courier magazine and its publisher, Anna Rold. Anna, thank you. And she is among the co-chairs for today's event and the organization. The Phillips Collection, in whose auditorium we sit, and who is a prominent art symbol in the Washington, D.C. area. To BFF Banking Group, my organization, International Arts and Artists, APCO, and as I said, I encourage you to read about the partners and about the agenda via the QR code that you can scan and get into more details. And now I would like to invite Renato, our former cultural attaché of the Italian Embassy, independent curator, to open today's discussion. And following Renato's comments, we will have the panel, the first panel. So I would ask our Eugene Robinson, who is a journalist and political analyst here in Washington, as well as Gringoire Roos, who is with BMW Foundation, to come forward along with Renato to take your seats. Thank you all very much, and let's have a fabulous afternoon.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. In that photo is me. Maybe you don't recognize me, but it was a few months ago. Don't worry. Happens to everybody. I'm really familiar. I really love to be in this auditorium today because I was just for 4 years. I was a guest curator at the Phillips Collections, so I have so many. A lecture and presentation of exhibition here, so I'm really in one of my favorite rooms in Washington, D.C. Today, thank you, Juanita, for your remarks. I would like only to say that we don't have any answer to all the questions that Juanita told you. We have only questions. So, and today we will spread some seed that maybe in the future we can grow. My remarks are really, really simple now. I have two hats. Maybe you don't see mine. I have two hats. One is on behalf of the ambassador and the Italian embassy to say they were really, really glad to be under the umbrella of the Italian embassy. And I would like just to point out Joel, I don't know if you are here. I don't know, Juanita, you are here. But I would like just only to say how the Italian embassy was working when I was a cultural attaché and when Juanita was cultural attaché, Juanita Giorgio, and Joel Melchiorri is now the cultural attaché. We were working a lot about all the topics that we are talking today. We signed an agreement for preserving art between the State Department and the Italian Minister of Culture. I was one of the signed and defined the protocol and the MOU. We were working in 2011 as the 150th anniversary of the Italian unification. We were working with more than 80 museums in 2013 about the Italian year of Italian culture in US. And we were working with the CIA and State Department and Carabinieri on preserving the art. And especially we wrote together, I as an Italian cultural attaché and with the State Department and with the CIA, we wrote just a book about 15 years of MOU between Italy and US. And this is one hat. The other hat, I am the curator for BFF collection. Later, and maybe Greg will say a few words about this, I will have a tour of the little exhibition that we have downstairs in Hiller Space. And I would like more than happy to bring you through the little example of their collection. I don't dare to speak on behalf of the CEO, Massimiliano Max Bellingheri, but as a curator, I would like just to say how the collection is a precise moment into the Italian art history, because it's the moment when Italy and US were connected, where so many Italian artists were exhibited in US, like in Viviano Gallery or so many other Tartaruga and other spaces in US, and so many Italian artists went to Europe to meet them, to have some roots. And later I would like just to talk about with you with Burri and Rauschenberg, or Dorazio, or Schifano, Andy Warhol, and Jasper Jones. There are a lot of connections that has to be explored. And I don't know if you have the chance, there is a book on sale. I don't want to sell my book because I'm, don't worry, but there is a book in the Phillips collection and maybe for selling here outside about exactly the interaction between Italy and US. The collection of BFF soon, next year, will be displayed in a huge museum in Milan. And it's really a rare opportunity to explore the deep connection and, as I said, interaction between Italy and American art history. Now I change my hat and I'm going there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Renato. I think you are underselling the magnificent show that you have at the Hillier Space, which is right over there. And
Yeah.
I really urge everybody to see it. It is really, really terrific. And that reflects not just the fact that the BFF collection is terrific, but that Renato is too.
I didn't pay him.
Not just his taste in his eye, but his comprehensive knowledge about history and context and everything else of not just American and Italian art, but I think we could pick a country and we could ask Renato. I am in here in part because it's a pleasure. I'm also a member of the International Arts and Artists Board of Trustees, and I love art. Thinking about a week or so ago, I'm thinking about, well, how do we get into this? How do we start talking about it? I mean, there's never, it should come as no surprise to anyone that there's often a linkage between money and art, right? I mean, you know, so much art over millennia has exists because of the sponsorship of wealthy patrons and wealthy institutions in many cases, the church and others. But in terms of corporations, modern companies, that's a little different. So I was thinking this through, and I came across a story that was that happened to be in the Financial Times about Japan, about how in the 1980s, many companies in Japan, because in the 80s, remember, Japan was just going to take over the entire world financially. It was, and the economy was booming. The corporations were just flush with money, and they bought a lot of art. And I mean, you know, they bought Rothko and Pollock, and all. They bought, you know, mega art, and some of it is regularly shown, some of it is not. And just recently, this Financial Times story said there's sort of increasing pressure from activist investors to explain why. Here is this, you know, potentially in some corporations could be $1 billion asset. Or more. And why are we doing this? Why is that capital not either being used in other ways or returned to the shareholders? And so that's something that they're going to have to work through. I hope they make the right decisions. But so let me start with you, Gregoire, from the BMW Foundation. BMW Foundation really gets the concept of societal engagement. So what should that answer be about why?
We only have, what, 31 minutes? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's not just a good question, it's an important one. And the why, I guess you would answer differently depending on where you stand across the pond, whether you're here. I think most of the time the why is clear, because philanthropists do happen to be aware of their social role. I mean, we are here, you know, in the house of an extraordinary couple that are actually family, who assumed their kind of social duty as not just people who happen to have money. That was actually not what mattered. What mattered really is that they had a passion. And if you go, actually, I was struck to see, well done to the curator for offering us that the private diary of Duncan Phillips, who would write what he thought about Cézanne. And I think that was the relation between the Louvre, and then you would go through it and see, you know, the passion. I think that's the first point. And of course, in the US, and I think we had that discussion already, the line is already much thinner than it is in Europe, the line between so-called high net worth individuals and corporations.
Yeah.
And even when you have a corporate collection, you always have a very charismatic person behind it. You could
Generally
look at the
speaking,
Walton Foundation and many others. In Europe, you're right. I think, and to be honest, it's not just the activist funds. There also have been discussions on boards, and I was in discussion with, I'm now in the foundation, I was in the financial industry before, in a group that had a much bigger art collection. And they say, why? I mean, if we want to, you know, reduce the risk, we just invest in real estate or gold. Why just bothering investing in art? I mean, you can do a bit of paintings, you hang it there, and it shows that, okay, we are open to creativity, but period. And actually, you have many businesses who say no, because actually we stand for something. Whether, you know, we are in the shipping industry or in the financial industry, we stand for something. And we want to tell our shareholders, our clients, whether those are businesses or citizens, private individuals, that we stand out from the crowd of the competitors, because we actually stand for something. So the capital is invested not just in curation, not just in preservation and protection and conservation, but also in curation. And the third layer is, of course, promotion. This is also a house, a home, where, you know, art has not just been conserved, but also curated and promoted. So I think that again, there's much to learn from Europeans here, because the culture is different. I mean, the simple fact that you have such an extraordinary event with, you know, journalists, APCO, and actually, if you look at APCO, founded by one of the most successful businesswomen in the country, diplomat to Courier, which was developed by a woman as well, and it says something, one thing or two about how you approach things. You know, you're entrepreneurial. So I will not drag on, but I think it's a very important question in starting that discussion on alliances, and I guess that Massimiliano would join the conversation. He would, I think he would say, and we had discussions with him, that indeed there's a lot we can learn.
Well, speaking of Massimiliano, he couldn't be here today, the CEO of BFF, which has the large collection from which those pieces are drawn, and which Renato is intimately familiar with. So I'm afraid we're going to have to ask you to explain, Renato. So what happens? You become CEO of a big bank, and you're also custodian, curator, whatever, of an important and large art collection. What do you do? What do you think about that? How has Massimiliano dealt with it?
Okay, yes, Massimiliano was really sorry. Just his flight was canceled 3 times yesterday, so in his.
It wasn't Alitalia, was it?
Wasn't Alitalia, it was a British Airways. I'm sorry to say.
It
Don't you dare.
It could have been a German company, by the way.
Yes, don't you dare. No, and it was sorry. So when he became just the CEO of the BFF, this collection. How this collection can be an identity for the bank. How this collection that he will display in the future in this museum they are building up in Milan, how this collection is related with the bank. And that is really a mission for a bank to display a collection. Why? Let me do just 2 steps forward. When you mentioned before, Jean, about Financial Times, I just came from the Biennale of Venice, one of the most largest exhibitions all over the world. And in the plane, because I couldn't sleep, I was checking, and I have some dates here, so I would like just to share with you. What does it mean, this art world? What does it mean in numbers? So the survey of global collecting 2023, printed by Basel, we are talking about $67.8 billion worldwide. And despite of high risk, the number of people, single identity, corporation, bank, foundation, association is increasing. And individual collector, 54%, they say they would like to continue to collect, even if they have to borrow money from the bank. And this number, to the Chinese people, 68% of the Chinese foundation of corporation wants to invest in art. So this is the first questions we have to think about. Why? Art is an asset, so you are investing in art, or art is a kind of identity. If it is an identity, what kind of identity is this one? Why you would like just to be represented by art, and what kind of art you like to collect? Some other number. In Venice, this is a number, I'm not sure the other one I showed, because I saw online, this was a number that a journalist gave to me in Venice. 127 corporation, bank, foundation supported a little event in Venice. From Bottega Veneta to Bank of America. So from, I don't know, little foundation to another one. Why? So this is, I don't have the answer. I don't have the answer. This is the answer. This is why I say before, we don't have any answer. We have only put questions about this. And now what we are seeing is that people are not collecting art from art fair, neither from galleries, direct relationship with the artist. This is another change of, I don't know, of the flow. You know what I mean? It's something totally different. And when I say art means freedom? Maybe yes. Maybe one aspect of the art is freedom. And I would like just to point out simply that in this country, and I'm Italian as well, but I'm American as well, at the beginning of 2024, in some state, 4,200 books were banned. And this is a number that PEN Foundation gave to everybody. So art means for now freedom, because books till now means freedom. Maybe art is freedom. When I say at the beginning, art is identity, maybe art means freedom as well. Okay. I don't want to say more. Okay. I don't want to say more. Fabulous. I have some other numbers, but
no,
I will share later.
No, that's really interesting, and it's interesting to make that comparison to Penn's numbers about books being banned.
Yeah.
It's there's a slightly different dimension to art in terms of a corporation deciding to. Yes. To collect, in that it is an investment. It has been a very good investment, generally speaking, I would think. Is that right? I mean, for those corporations, the value of their collections has certainly soared. I suspect that there's more there, though. There is something of a statement being made, because art can be adventurous, and art can be rude, and art can be new and something people haven't seen before, and people might not initially that people might initially be shocked by. Yet we see things like the Louis Vuitton Museum in Paris, right? There's a company that has this amazing museum in Paris.
Chanel, Vuitton.
Exactly. I was in that article. I read about a Japanese company I frankly had never heard before, not even in Tokyo, that's got these masterpieces, and I think there has to have been a vision and a sense of how to engage with the world. Grégoire, tell me a bit about how that's thought of at BMW and the BMW Foundation, that sort of engagement. If you have a foundation like this, it's not just like, well, we make good cars and sell them to you, and that's that.
The best cars.
Yeah, the best cars, of course.
That's an on-the-record discussion.
No.
Yes, right.
I'm sure had it been the BMW Airways, he would be with us. Massimiliano would be with us.
For sure.
I'm certain. Look,
can I ask for a gift left?
We might, yes. Let's take this off stage. No, I think, again, I'd like to stress a word that you used, Eugene, that for me echoes so well what Juanita said in her introduction. It's the word vision. Mm-hmm. And I'm not here, in any way, the kind of representative of the private entrepreneurs or business appreciation society, but I must say that you stressed the fact that businesses were investing and that it was a good investment. If you look at it, they don't sell so much.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They don't sell so much. Mm-hmm. Some of them, especially in Japan, but not enough to my taste in Japan, when one looks at the remarkable level of their collections, are promoting what they have in museums, but others it's in bank, but they don't sell. They could. They don't. Way less than private collectors. Right. I think that's the first point, and one would wonder why. If it's just investing in value, you invested in 30 years ago, why wouldn't you sell and buy?
Yeah.
So I think that stresses that there's something more to it than just the mere pursuit of return on investment. And going to that point of vision, I think, of course, foundations, but generally speaking, private businesses have many different ways of trying to make an impact on society. So some fund awards, prizes, fellowships. Others give grants through either their own corporate identity, or they go through non-profits, and as for that matter, foundations. I mean, we mostly focus on advancing responsible leadership. So how do we bring, we train a new generation of leaders who are rooted in empathy and understanding the other's perspective. So I think that's a sense of humility, and also understanding that your decisions today will have a long-lasting impact of the nature that you might not even be able to measure, because you might die, but it will still resonate.
I might die one of these, at some point, I guess.
Well, I heard that could be a likelihood. But I think one very important point that Juanita stressed, and I think that really nails it because it's the heart of the question of alliance, is that we have much more in common than we think.
Yes. Yes.
And when companies invest, and a very important point that Renato stressed is that if they used to go through galleries, now they go directly to artists. I mean, that means something.
Yes.
That does mean something. That means that you have a real personal relation with the artist, but also a greater involvement in the artistic process. Yes. And so, I mean, when you go, for instance, to, there's a say that when Whitney bought her first painting by Hopper, they stood together and he was asked, what do you represent? And there was a big silence. So she asked the question again, and Hopper would not answer. He said, but you're not answering. And he said, well, if there were words to explain what I did, there would be no point in painting.
Right.
And the fact that someone would say as a company, I invest in that, that means that you invest in something that is a unique way of expressing reality.
Yes.
And I think that's a powerful reality. Stand up for something in a world where one would think that the market economy is just about manufacturing, selling, reinvesting. No, there's something more to it. And we live in a society, not just in the United States, the European will confirm that is extremely polarized, and where it's increasingly difficult to be able sometimes to finish one sentence because the other has already left the stage in a very noisy way. And I mean, there are very few people that actually happen to be leaders who have that ability of keeping people together. And artists are of that kind of people.
Art does it.
So the fact that, a company, and sometimes, you're manufacturing razors. I mean, what would you invest in either Picasso or the new generation of artists? BMW, for instance, is mostly investing in a new generation of creators and artists. Why would you do that? Because you believe, at some point you extend your mandate that you empower the people whom you believe have the power of keeping society together. And this is something that at some point, it's a new renaissance in a way.
Yes.
You stress that money has always been linked to art, and I think it's great. There should be a lot of money in art, because without money, artists can't live. It's not vulgar to say so, we should, and the more money there is, the better. And I think that there's a real political question. How can we really foster that movement? I think it's way more mature in the US, where again there's a sense that companies have a social role, and that it's philanthropy for philanthropy. And in Europe, there's still a lot to be learned. But it's growing, as you said, it's growing, but we're not there. I mean, there's a real gap. And society is still, polarization and fragmentation is rising. And now you have new technologies. You talk about artificial intelligence. I mean, this will have, or virtual reality, this will have a massive impact on how you enlarge your audience. You reach out to new generations who might not necessarily be the target. I would not say the target, but whose first reflex on a Sunday morning would not be, let's go to the museum. Well, actually, no, because they're not aware that they have it. It's there. It's yours.
Yeah, I know.
I would conclude on that. But the
No, I
fact,
think
what
that
you
was-
stressed, yeah, on the fact that they really reach out to artists directly, I think says a lot about the keenness to engage with
Yes.
them and not just go through galleries like you go
Yeah.
to the market saying, I will order this and that.
Yeah.
You know, you engage with the artist.
I think you're getting there. Did you have anything to add to that, Renato?
Yeah, no,
Lots of figures, and the list is not over. So.
yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, right. Oh, your
That's the
figures. That's
Pandora's
right.
box,
No,
huh?
that's what you-
No, we were talking with Gregoire before about this, and when we were talking about pavilion in Venice, the Qatar has a huge pavilion in Venice. Can you imagine Qatar? Mm-hmm. They are building 12 museums. 12.
Amazing.
So
Amazing. Yeah.
It's a way how we are preserving shared memories. No, it's the title of our panel, and it's incredible. Like we were talking about U.S. and Europe, but for example, France, Macron opened every single fair in Paris, just to be linked with the private sector as a political sector. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you are a French artist, you can apply for a monthly money. At the end of the year, you have to give to the state from 5 to 7 paintings or artworks. So we really have to learn from each other, according to me. We don't have to live in a box. We have to learn. We have to be open to learn from each other. Regarding the one we were talking about, artificial intelligence, I was working now with this exhibition that I opened 2 days ago. I don't know. Seems to me 3 months ago. With the VAR. VAR is a $1 billion company who is doing virtual reality or video. This is, we were talking with Gregoire before, this is another way of languages. This is another alphabet. This is another, and we have to be aware of this. We really have to be ready to respond to this new generation. Because our mission, and I'm not tired to repeat, as an art historian, my problem is how we can pass to the other generation. I have grandkids. So how they can learn from me, how I'll be the link from the past to the future in a way they can understand. So, because maybe my generation is the last one who can read the writings. So my generation has the duty to put in a computer. Otherwise, so many writings are totally lost. So, and in this sense, so many times we have to think ahead how we can preserve our memory in a collection, in a writing, or how we can pass to the next generation.
Yeah, because
all this information, all
right.
this memory.
Yeah, and by preserving memory and information, we're also preserving a sense of who we are.
Yeah, exactly.
A sense of what we
Identity.
were about. And our values and our aspirations, our hopes, our dreams, our nightmares. We are presenting that as well. I could talk to Renato and Gregoire all afternoon and part of the evening, but I'm not allowed because we have other because there's another exciting panel, and I want to leave. So let's have a few questions. We have time for a bit of question and answers. If someone, there are folks on the side who have microphones, and so if you have a question for our panel, please
Yes, please.
raise your hand. Those gentlemen.
Yeah,
And you'll be recognized.
we love questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm Jeff. I'm a stamp collector, and I'm trying to expand on the base and change, not add to, like you're adding to the next generation. I'm a motorcycle collector. One of my next door neighbors has 40 Italian bikes, and he just passed away. He was 70.
Yeah.
And so one of the things the collectors have is that the kids aren't coming along. They're not moving forward. And they don't want to, the Generation Z or whatever it is, they don't
Yeah.
want to have a 1969 big monster car. They want to do something else. And trying to get, the folks to, the younger people to be involved
Yeah.
is a pretty big challenge. And this is the challenge you're working on right here with business-wise, but there are other, levels of getting involved. And it's a challenge. It's a really big challenge. If you could go into deeper, a little bit deeper into how you choose your audience and what you do to pinpoint it, that might help a little bit. Because I'm working on, with the different groups. Right now, I'm working on this. I did a little promotion like that at the last stamp show, and it's a challenge to find something that will inspire people to go with a direction. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's hard for a lot of kids these days to know what a stamp is. And that's,
I know.
That's part of,
Even the
seriously,
post office
and of course, that's not to, and so that is a challenge. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand the challenge, and I understand how,
So-
how
The other
No.
people who collect ice cream scoops.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
no, sorry. Regarding your question, your statement, I would suggest you go and buy this book by a friend of mine, Denis Levinas, The Guardian of Art. He was interviewing 20 collectors all over the world, and it's really incredible how they choose vision, identity, and how they try to transfer to the next generation. In my case, I would like just to share with you, I have a little collection. And I know very well that as soon as I die, my kids will sell for $1,000 is too much, $100. I love them and they love me. So in my will, because I just wrote a will, I decide just to give to little simple museum. They will fit there, because all the effort I put in creating my little tiny collection has to be respected. And so I will share with other people. I will leave each of them one pieces, but the other one has to be shared with humanity.
Thank you.
I don't need that much.
Any other questions? Anybody else?
Yes, please.
Yes, there's a gentleman
I
down
think
here. Here
there's
comes the microphone.
There's a woman.
Oh, okay, and there's somebody else over there too. Okay.
Thank you, Lee.
This is not a question, but I'd like to add some of the things. Is it
Yeah.
on? Okay. Like many collectors, and when they love art objects, they keep buying and buying, but their children are not interested in. They have a hard time donating their collections. For example, Charles Freer, who didn't have any kids, successfully donated his Japanese and Chinese to Smithsonian.
Yes.
There's some people I know, like Dr. Feinberg, who is the biggest collector of Japanese art, who lives in Washington, D.C., but had a hard time. He was going to donate many things to the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery,
Yes.
but finally he found Harvard Museum.
Yes.
But some people like Joe Price, who also had the biggest collection of Japanese art, tried to donate to LA County Museum, and they had problem. So he ended up donating everything to, just like Eugene said, Idemitsu Museum in Tokyo, finally.
Yes.
They have
Wow.
hard time. When they love art objects, they keep buying and buying. But when it comes to, they have to die and they have to
Yeah.
donate. And
Well, I think it's important before you die, try to do that. Grégoire?
If I can, I think
yeah.
that if I can bounce back on that, I think it's a very important point that the gentleman was also stressed. And if one is a bit critical, one would say that how can you expect anyone, whether it's your children or friends or your grandchildren, to develop any interest in something that they were never included in?
Yep.
You look at this history of this house. It's a family. It's a creative alliance. It's not just I bought something, my wife happened to be interested in. As for the children, just look at the stock market or the market value, or it's nice, isn't it? No, they were involved. Passion was shared. There was a lot of pedagogy. In some cases, I like blue, and I hate blue. Well, I can't change it. Fine. I'll sell it or give it to a museum. But in other cases, and by the way, it's not just true for, I'm a bibliophile, for instance. I collect first editions. But this is a passion that needs to be shared. I mean, otherwise, who would, your children or grandchildren need to understand the journey, the personal journey, why you chose those artists, why it mattered to you. At some point, it's like we're all going through, we had that discussion in personal family archives. It's just like looking at pictures from your grandparents without names. You don't know who those people are. So yes, the picture is cute, but it means nothing to you because you don't know who those people are. And I think that's also one of the reasons why now, and I have friends for whom it's the case, they say, okay, I'm honestly, and they were honest, I don't want to, I had my children late, I started to collect very early, they're not interested, but they don't know that they're not interested. But so they said, I gave everything to my company, which is also a solution, because at least, it's the certainty that the legacy is ensured. But I think that philosophically it raises the question of how open you need to be with your family and the next generation. And in some cases, a friend of mine said, look, but a collection is my personality, it's my secret. I don't want anyone to know my secret, so it goes to Christie's or Sotheby's, and I'm sure that it's scattered around,
Right.
which is nice. But I think that's a very, very important point, and I think that involving the people, and whether it's your family or the new generation, that's where new technologies matter, because you need to involve them. If you don't understand, and it's especially true for modern art, because you need a context.
Otherwise,
Was there another question over here someplace, I think?
There was a lady.
I think maybe we
Hi
have
there.
time for one more question. We're running a little late, but yes.
You touched a little bit upon the current divisiveness in our society, and so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the use of art as a vehicle for diplomacy, as a way to learn from each other and perhaps extend to other parts of a society, including the intersection between art and science.
So let me first speak about that. I know a little bit about division in our society right now. That sort of occupies a lot of my many of my days and too many of my nights thinking about that. So I think art absolutely can be something that we have in common when we have nothing else in common, or when we have very much do not have politics in common. And I will just give an example. I don't think he would mind my mentioning it. So I have come to know Ronald Lauder pretty well, and we consider ourselves friends now. Ronald is a conservative Republican. He was a pretty big supporter of Donald Trump when he ran the first time, much less so this time. He is maybe the person, arguably the individual most responsible for the fact that there is a Republican majority in the House now, because at the last minute and sort of under the radar, he spent a lot of money on gave a lot of money to Republican candidates in New York State who flipped a bunch of seats, and at this point, you know, the difference is only 2 seats. At this point, it would be a Democratic majority in the House, and I'm not a Republican, and I don't share those policies, but he is a keen and passionate and sensitive lover of art and collector of art, and he has a great eye, and so he and I have gotten to know each other through that, through art, and as a result, we can have conversations about other things. We can talk about politics, and we can talk about issues on which we disagree without, we don't necessarily come to agreement, but we're able to at least attempt to find whatever common ground there is, and it's more than civil. We can actually enjoy these discussions. All that sounds so very last century now, but it's true, and so we wouldn't have met if not for art in general. That was the sort of world in which we got to know each other, but also through what art does to you, and what art opens up for you, and so I absolutely think art can play just a huge role in if we will let it, and try. I think it can play a big role in sort of finding things that we can, times when we can at least be on the same page, and we can be in the same space, and we can be excited or horrified or enraptured by a brushstroke, by a color, by shape, and it's not to sound corny, but that's actually a really beautiful thing. Well, I'm going to thank everybody. I think our time is up, and I've always learned that when they clap, that's good. So,
The right moment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out. Thank you.
Well, that was fun. I'm Greg Houston. I'm the CEO of International Arts and Artists. And one of the best parts of my job is I've spent the last 3 weeks on Zooms with that group preparing for that session. As you can imagine, that's been a real highlight. Just looking out here, I've been sitting in the front row. What a great crowd we have here, too. Really pleased that we have so many people here. As we pivot now to our keynote speech, Ann Taylor Brittingham's work with the Italian Cultural Institution exemplifies art museums can be instrumental in promoting diversity and inclusion, right? In partnership with the U.S. Department of State, her initiatives underscore how museums can actively engage in cultural diplomacy by curating experiences that reflect the richness of human contemplation. in essence, what we're here to talk about today is the power, the soft power of art museums, right? The ability to influence through attraction rather than coercion, right? That has never been more essential than it is today. And what I'm looking forward to is understanding through this panel and then leveraging into our next panel exactly how we can think about that through the Phillips Collection and then into public-private partnerships. So as we welcome now, please welcome Anne. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg, and I want to say a big thanks to the Italian Embassy and International Arts and Artists and Hillier for putting together such a fantastic program. I've been a museum educator for about 20 years now, working at museums across the United States. And I do believe that museums at their best can be places that build community, foster empathy, and transform perspectives. So I'll spend the next 12 or 13 minutes, I think, speaking to a lot of what the last question asked about, how art can bring us together to do, as Eugene said, to at least be in the same space. All right, so cultural diplomacy in action. So cultural exchanges have been woven into the fabric of the Phillips Collection for decades, including a really special relationship with Italy. So works of art from our collection have traveled to Italy over the years, including a couple of examples that you can see here from 2010 and 2015. Italian artists have come into the Phillips Collection fairly recently, a group of contemporary Italian photographers and a major mixed media artwork by Federico Solmi that you can see on the left there, called The Great Farce Portable Theater. In addition, the Phillips Collection was the recipient in 2018 of a generous gift courtesy of the Embassy of Italy. So 4 paintings, including the one that you can see there on the right, by the mid-20th century Italian abstractionist Bice Lazzari, brought a significant female voice in Italy's post-war era into the museum's collection. And then we got the pleasure of working with Renato, so who I can confirm is terrific, as Eugene said. He organized this wonderful exhibition called An Italian Impressionist in Paris, Giuseppe De Nittis, that was organized in collaboration with the Pinacoteca Giuseppe De Nittis in Barletta. It was the first monographic exhibition of the artist in North America and opened here at the Phillips Collection November 12th, 2022. The exhibition illustrated how no artist lives in a bubble. De Nittis' work emerged from his friendships with artists like Manet and Caillebotte, his travels, the politics of the time, and the incredible technological innovations that transformed the world in the second half of the 20th century. Throughout history, the interaction of people, the exchanges of language, religion, and culture have improved relations between diverse groups of people. State Department collaborations have been an important part of the Phillips Collection, leading to exchanges across the globe. So where my story for us starts is in the summer of 2020. We were several months into the pandemic. Italy was in lockdown. Museums across the United States were closed. We were all struggling to process what was happening in the world. Children had their whole lives upended. Protests and systemic racism, against systemic racism were happening across the United States. So these are a few photographs from an exhibition that we did, a digital exhibition in 2020, where we asked people to submit a photo from their year. And at the end of the year, we put together this exhibition that really tried to capture the human emotions that was connecting all of us. In July of 2020, the U.S. Embassy in Rome reached out to the Phillips, interested in putting together an education program that would connect the Phillips with museum professionals across Italy. As Karen Schennerer, who was working in the consulate in Naples at the time and now is the cultural attaché in Rome, said, "While the U.S. government is limited in its resources and staff, U.S. embassies and consulates have the convening power to bring institutions and people together. With so much out of our control, it felt natural to seek out those things that we could." So those Zoom meetings that we all were on, trying to find ways to connect, even when we couldn't physically be together. and the opportunity to learn from our shared experiences, as Renato said, getting us out of the box and learning from each other. So after a few months of planning, we kicked off the exchange in February of 2021. In addition to members of the education department at the Phillips Collection, we were joined by museum professionals in Turin, Naples, Rome, and Florence. We were thinking about how could we support each other? How could we learn from each other? So questions we were asking ourselves: how do we reach audiences? So for example, in Italy, without the influx of tourists, Italian museums were focusing on their local communities in a more meaningful way. How do we remain relevant? A lot of that involved very quickly shifting to digital platforms, which was an opportunity to stay connected with our existing audiences, but also presented so many opportunities to grow new audiences. How were we taking care of ourselves and each other? So at the Phillips, we were asking ourselves, what was our role as a museum to help support people's well-being? So we developed an online meditation series. We put together art kits that we worked on with teachers to get materials into the classrooms to support teachers who were having to shift to digital learning. We handed out wellness kits from our space at the Arc in Southeast DC. So we did a sort of assessment in the beginning, sort of right before we kicked off. We wanted to see sort of where we were and where we hoped to get to. So we asked each of the participants to kind of share information about where they thought they were currently with education and community programs. And what we found was that even though we were in different cities, in different parts of the world, with very different collections, we had many things in common. So we were all working to incorporate diversity and inclusion across our education programs. We were using digital programs to reach new audiences. We were trying to connect with local audiences in different ways than we had previously. And we saw the value of using contemporary artists to connect with community and to connect with the issues of today. And then we sort of so these were the kind of common threads that came through about where we were trying to get to. So we wanted to maximize the power of storytelling and find ways to elevate stories that hadn't been told before. We felt really strongly that we all needed to be leaders within our institutions to ensure that diversity and inclusion was at the core of what we were doing, not off to the periphery, not a box that we were checking. We wanted to think about audiences in a new and more personal way, and connected to that, lead our program planning with the who rather than the what. We wanted to create a strategy to generate repeat visitors. So with this focus on local audiences, it's easy sometimes to get people to come one time. How do we get them to come back again and again and feel like they're truly a part of our museums? And then finally, how could we collaborate better? So within our own museums and also with other institutions. So getting back to wanting to start with the who. Our first workshop focused on the use of empathy to connect with audiences. I like to do an exercise where we develop personas and think about an audience as a specific person. So what's their name? How old are they? What do they do for a living? What do they like to do in their spare time? What are their expectations for the museum? What are their challenges for getting there? So from an understanding about who something is for, then we start to develop the what. So we wrote stories about our person and used an empathy map to think about what they would say, what they would think, what they would do, what they would feel about their experience with our museums. So Alessio at Palazzo Strozzi wanted to develop a program for teens who were living in the suburbs outside of Florence. So he wrote about Davide, a 19-year-old who liked playing soccer with his friends. He knew Davide would want to come to Florence with those friends. They'd take the train, they'd want to eat, hang out, have fun. And so out of this persona, he could start to develop a corresponding program. After our empathy workshop, each institution specifically defined a problem that they were trying to solve. We used design thinking to encourage creative problem solving, innovation, and collaboration in program and exhibition development. And then we all brainstormed together around each of those problem statements. So we used Zoom breakout rooms to pair a Phillips educator with an Italian educator, and we built upon 1 month session to develop the next. So throughout this whole process, I wanted to be responsive. It was sort of uncharted territory. None of this had really been done in this format before. And for each of the sessions, I wanted each one to lead to a useful, tangible product that was easy for each museum to implement. And through the workshops, we used art to help us shift our perspectives and to see differently. So an example, we talked about the first word that comes to mind when you look at Renoir's Luncheon of the Boating Party. So words like happy, fun, social, flirty. Then we looked at Jacob Lawrence Migration Series, panel number 45. The migrants arrived in Pittsburgh, one of the great industrial centers of the North. We noticed we have the same kind of similar group of people sitting around a table with some food in there. We thought about similarities between the two, in particular talking about compositionally, those yellow hats, sort of elements that connected them. And then we talked about the ways that they were different. And then after this conversation, we thought about how our word for luncheon might change. Perhaps we start to see the privilege. We recognize that all the people are white. We notice who's left out. We start thinking about power. We used works of art to open up conversations and serve as a starting point for discussions about different perspectives. So here's an example of a warm-up exercise we used at one of our sessions, where we asked each person to pick the artwork that they thought best exemplified complicated. So I'd imagine if we did that right now, we'd all have different ones that we might choose. We'd be able to see ones where each person maybe picked one, or who picked two. So we did this over Zoom, and then we talked about it. We all look at works of art through a different lens. We bring our lived experiences, our biases, our likes and our dislikes to each experience. So the education department developed a card game during the pandemic, and this is kind of modeled after that game, but in a digital format. So I grew up playing cards with my grandmother and her friends, and I knew that cards were inherently accessible in a way that sometimes works of art aren't always to people. And I thought there has to be a way of bringing that experience to help people engage with works of art. So I found sometimes people have a hard time feeling comfortable finding the words to talk about a work of art. So what happens when you give them the word, like complicated, to get the conversation started? At the Phillips, I try to develop tools that can be used in a variety of ways. I wanted each Italian museum to feel like together we were building our toolkit with instruments that we could adapt and use easily. After the 5 months of virtual Zoom sessions, each museum developed a program that they then piloted. In May of 2022, when the world started opening up again, educators from the Phillips were able to travel to Italy. We were able to see the status of the projects that they had begun to pilot, and here's a panel that we got to be a part of where we co-presented together with our Roman Museum colleagues a session around our shared work in diversity and inclusion. Then the Phillips was able to facilitate programs for Italian high school and university students, as well as conduct workshops for local nonprofits like Daedalus, that works with recent immigrants to Italy, specifically in Naples. These connections were all facilitated through the consulate office. These programs helped younger generations of Italians have positive associations and personal relationships with the United States. Italy and the US have a history of strong ties. A Pew Research Center study from 2022 showed that public approval of the US by Italians is still high at 61%, although some question if the United States is still a good model for democracy and think that racism is a serious problem in the United States. The U.S. Embassy Rome's 2022 Integrated Country Strategy stated, the United States needs to continually work to maintain public support, particularly among youth, to build upon historically strong U.S. and Italian ties. So programs like this one do just that. They cultivate relationships with high schoolers, with university students, with young professionals under 35. Again, you see us using art as an entry point with this group of teens in Naples. We had each youth select an image that they felt a personal connection to. We looked at Jacob Lawrence's Migration Series, and they created art about their personal journeys and the things that we carry with us. Art offers a safe space to address challenging issues around the breakdowns in democracy and systemic racism. It can help us be more aware of our own power and privilege, and offers a lens through which we can critically examine institutional and structural power systems. Finally, these cultural exchanges are enhanced even further through the work of organizations like Eddy Global Forum, based in Naples at the Fondazione Miracco. The Eddy Global Forum seeks to inspire change, promote sustainability, connect communities, and spark innovation through art and culture. They host an annual conference every year that brings together 200 museum professionals representing 180 institutions from 5 continents to discuss the most pressing issues of the day. And they create subgroups that allow us to meet monthly. For example, I'm able to meet monthly with a group of people from around the world about the democratization of museums and the work that we can do with that. In conclusion, museums at their best invite people in and create opportunities for everyone to see themselves reflected in the museum. Museums build community by bringing people together, especially those that may not otherwise have things in common. They offer sources of knowledge that we can trust, something that I think takes on even more importance in this world that we're living in now. They create spaces where individuals can bring their whole selves into their experience. The Phillips Collections work with Italy and the US State Department is an illustration of a partnership at its best. It's about mutual respect and promoting new developments and skills. It uses cultural dialogue as an exchange of ideas that is explicitly two-way and requires the active participation of all parties. It is a reflection of the impact that we can make when we bring together art, diverse perspectives, and government entities to remind us what is good about humanity and generate solutions to the extreme challenges that we face today. Thank you.
And that was terrific. Thank you. Connecting people. You know, there are a lot of things up there, but connecting people is a theme throughout today. And it means quite a lot to us at our organization, International Arts and Artists. Our mission is to connect people through arts and culture. What you've talked about is how you do it through your methods. What I'm really excited about this last panel, you know, cultural diplomacy in any of its forms has the potential to bridge divides, foster understanding, create solutions to intractable problems. Mel Hardy and I talk about this all the time. Yet the puzzle remains, how do we bring the right resources? How do we bring the right talents? How do we bring the right perspectives together to unlock its potential? That's the question we're looking to answer today, or best explore. Guiding us through this discussion is our moderator, also my friend, and in some ways my mentor, is Anna Rold, CEO of the Diplomatic Courier. With her vast experience in international relations and commitment to bringing diverse perspectives together, she's the perfect person to lead this conversation. Anna, I now turn to you to introduce your panel, spark this conversation.
So let's just begin. We don't have a lot of time together, so I wanted to get right into the meat and potatoes of things. So you think of me as the opening act. So I'm going to start, one by one, and then end with Marjorie at the end. But let's begin with, so, let me just say this. I'm very lucky to call these 3 people here dear friends throughout my career. They have supported me so greatly, and I've learned so much from them by example. So even though, some of them are diplomats, but I would consider all of them diplomats, and you don't need to be an ordained diplomat to be a diplomat. And in fact, that's what the role of diplomatic courier is, to be the interlocutor, to be the diplomat in between the different organizations and countries and sectors. So I'll begin with Lisa. When I first met you, Lisa, you had just ended your tenure as the Ambassador Commissioner General of the USA Pavilion at the Aichi World Expo, and we're about to have another World Expo in Japan next year. So tell me a little bit. So you were at the height of your career, and leaving a great corporate world and having advised presidents and governors, and you just left it all and went to Japan to advance cultural relations between Japan and America. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Well, there's nothing that is a greater honor than to be able to represent your country. And especially because the theme songs that I got to talk about were hope, optimism, enterprise, and freedom. And those were core relationships, values that were shared not only by the United States, but by our Japanese counterparts. And we brought 19 state delegations, 16 of which were led by governors, and had the opportunity to put on display the things from an artistic perspective that were most important to each of those states. It was their goal to set up both manufacturing relationships, but also travel and tourism relationships. And so that was the emphasis of what we did. The wide variety of what we showed can be seen in the different programming. We had the premiere of Batman there. We had an opportunity to have the New York City Opera came and performed both in Tokyo as well as in Nagoya. We had the USC Marching Band, and which was a favorite of Prime Minister Abe's because he had gone to USC. And so he loved the marching band and he loved the cheerleaders. So you can take an art form in any direction you wanted to. Later, I would get to go to the state dinner with Prime Minister Koizumi at the White House with President Bush. And you may remember that he went to Graceland the next day. They asked him where he wanted to go after he went to the White House, and he went to Graceland. And he was a fan of Elvis and wasn't supposed to, but managed to somehow put those sunglasses on. So I think what that shows, though, is you have to look at what's important to each individual on both sides of the diplomatic equation, and you have to really understand what's important to an individual as both a cultural element and a personal element. So Haley Barbour brought a jazz singer by the name of Super Chicken. So having your variety going from the New York City Opera to Batman to Super Chicken and the USC Marching Band, what it allowed us to do is put on display various talents and capabilities of the American people and what makes our country unique. And the good news for us is that the Japanese people also had a great love for jazz. They had a great love for the American cinema. They had a great love for our opera. And we had a great appreciation of the technical competency they actually brought to each of those performance theaters. That was another element of it. It was one that was made it rather spectacular, is that the Toyota family, the Sony family, they were heavily involved in ensuring that every single presentation of our artwork had the best sound. And I truly can't begin to tell you how amazing it is when you hear that music swell up in a theater that's been designed by some of the best sound and technical people in the world.
Thank you, Lisa, for that. Ashraf, I know that, by the way, I've known Ashraf in the beginning of his diplomatic career when he was in Washington. And what a journey you've had as a diplomat. You've kind of done every job in the embassy, I would say, from cultural to commercial to being an ambassador, DCM. And what I wanted to talk about, your country being Afghanistan, in that, you know, I would say the challenge of practicing cultural diplomacy when you're a superstate like the United States versus when you are a state like Afghanistan with fewer resources is kind of a different challenge, yet you made the best out of it, especially in countries that were neighboring Afghanistan. So I want you to tell us a little bit about some of your best experiences and challenging, but also where you saw the most opportunity for your country at the time.
Well, thank you so much. Of course, Afghanistan is still being war-ravaged, and the Taliban are back, as you all know. Now gender apartheid is back, extremism, terrorism. But yet Afghanistan has had a very rich history of some 5,000 years. And that's why we have had in Afghanistan the Bactrian gold dating back 2,000 years ago, which we sent around the world to be exhibited and museums, including here in the United States and different states here in Texas, as far as I remember, and was involved in some parts of that. and California, in New York, I think here also at Smithsonian in Washington, but also to China. When I was there, people were visiting one of the museums, and they were astonished to see these ancient gold artifacts from 2,000 years ago, which add influences from the Persian, Chinese to Roman, and as well as Greek. And so, but unfortunately, as you said, we have always had the resources to get things done in terms of cultural diplomacy. But we, of course, try to find as many opportunities and sources of assistance, especially from the United States government, Department of the State, USAID, especially, I think, the Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy, under whom cultural diplomacy falls. She was very supportive. Paula Dobriansky. We used to work very closely with Ambassador Jawad to engage in cultural diplomacy and to share as much of Afghanistan's arts, music, and culture with the United States, but also in my career in other parts of the world, especially India being one of our closest neighbors, and as well as Sri Lanka. We did the same, not only bilaterally, but also multilaterally through South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SAARC, as much as, of course, there's tensions in South Asia involving India and Pakistan, but even those countries under the umbrella SAARC, which is a multilateral institution, including Afghanistan as a member of state, we did a lot through cultural diplomacy, film festivals, concerts of artists from different countries, and as well as exhibitions and collections of arts, literature festivals, especially poetry being very common in Afghanistan, sharing, of course, ancient history with Persia. Of course, we all know Rumi or Balkhi. Actually, Rumi, it's called Rumi, but he was actually born in my country, in northern Afghanistan, a city where I used to live, but then he traveled to different countries and ended up in Rumi, but in the West he's known as Rumi, and other such poets. So we did as much as we could, but unfortunately now all is lost under the Taliban. They're back, as you all know, I may recall from early 2001, before 9/11, the Taliban tragically, as the world watched on CNN and other channels, dynamited the statues of Buddha from the 15th century. Those Buddhas actually stood tall when at one time the Afghan Empire championed Islam. Of course, Islam is tolerant of different faiths, and under Islam and the past, different faiths actually thrive. But unfortunately, this extremist version that's nothing to do with Islam destroyed those statues. So we, in that regard, we, under the Islamic Republic, work very closely with Japanese, with Chinese, and as well as with UNESCO to renovate, to rebuild as much of the destroyed statues as possible. But unfortunately, as I said, now everything is lost. The Taliban are back, and we're worried about the Bactrian gold, which is now again hidden. It was hidden during the 1990s when the Taliban ruled Afghanistan, but of course it was hidden by the museum personnel who then came out and after the fall of the Taliban where the Bactrian gold was. But again, it is hidden, and we'll see when the international community will help Afghanistan regain our freedom of terrorism and extremism to form an inclusive government that obeys, of course, local cultures and as well as international obligations to regain those. Thank you.
Ashraf, thank you so much. I remember last year I met a few Afghan artists that are now based in Paris, and the world the work that they are still continuing to do to advance not just the understanding of Afghanistan's rich culture, but at this moment in time for them, that's a statement. That's a form of resistance. So thank you for sharing your thoughts here. Marjorie,
Yes.
I left you for last because I think you can probably cover the world right now. I've seen you in action, being sort of an unordained diplomat, but you work closely with embassies. You work closely with nations. You work closely with leaders of nations, whether they're cultural ambassadors or actual heads of states. Tell me a little bit about how you advise them to advance their cultural diplomacy initiatives.
Well, I was just going to make a couple of comments first before I do that, which is I think all of us need to think about cultural diplomacy that's all around us that, as I travel the world, I'm always struck, and sometimes you don't think about it unless you focus on it, the background music, it's American music. Or if you're, for the most part, or I remember going around during the time when Dallas was such a popular show, and so much of the world thought the U.S. was, Dallas. And we laugh, but it just shows the power of what we're talking about, and that, these kind of things in art and culture really do make a difference in how you're perceived. And I think that's what we have to remember as we think about all of this. And I'm really saddened also when you see all these wars going on, because we know that some of the greatest treasures of our lifetime, of the lifetime of the world, are being destroyed as we're sitting here. And that's very sad. I think that there are a few things about, and I know this is about partnerships too. I think for companies that are going around the world, one of the things that we would also advise is that, as you enter a market or a culture, some of the best ways to partner coming in is not to get that business deal done per se, but to figure out how you become a respected member of that community, and how you can take, in essence, something that is uniquely part of your purpose, and how you make it a shared value with the people that you're going to be working with or that you're going to see. So I think there are a lot of opportunities to do that, and I don't know that people always think about it. So that as you kind of learn a culture, sharing things that depends what field you're in, but that help to either create a mechanism for bringing people along or whatever. I know a lot of times we're doing a lot of work in Saudi Arabia right now, and there's so many misperceptions, some of them earned and some of them not, about the country. But when you look at what the cultural heritage is, and when you see what they're doing to protect and preserve it, and you bring people there, it really does change their whole view of the kingdom. And I think that's very true of other places as well. And I think that we forget sometimes the power of that kind of cultural bonding, and how you can create those relationships that come from a shared experience, a shared value, a shared love of something. And one of the stories that I will always think about when I think about cultural diplomacy is one of our colleagues is Dan Glickman, who, after he was Secretary of Agriculture, became the head of the Motion Picture Association. And he was talking about being called before a president made a visit to a certain head of state for 6 copies of 6 in a series of adventure movies, basically. And it turned out that when you go to some of these other countries, sometimes the quickest way to the heart of the leader is by sharing that kind of cultural thing, and that it softened the ability to have a discussion. The person was thrilled. And another good example of that I heard about in one case was somebody who was going to meet Fidel Castro. And he did some studying, and he heard that nobody gets more than 5 minutes. And he went out, I don't know if people remember this, but Fidel Castro was a baseball. He actually, if he had been a little bit better, he would have made Major League Baseball, and the future of Cuba would have been very different. But true story. And so he went and researched all the baseball players of the era, and he made a baseball book. And when he sat down with Castro, he had some gifts. He gave him, oh, yeah. And he brought out this book. And an hour and a half later, Castro was still going through the pictures with him, saying, no, I was really better than him. And but I mean, it's a common bond. It's a way you identify. It's a way you get together. So anyway, I could go on, but there are a lot of things like that that we just should think about.
I just love these stories, especially because this is exactly how we interact with each other. And so it would make sense that it would work so well when we do it state to state or with leaders, right? It's just where we're looking for that piece of humanity that unites us. Someone in the audience earlier asked an excellent question, and all I want to do was just stand up and be like, we're going to talk about that. It's our panel's job to talk about that. But you talked to, if someone asked a question about, this world we're living in today, this day, this moment in time is just so polarized. It feels like if you're just watching your feeds, you're inundated by polarization, by the fact that everybody disagrees. In fact, and I was reading an article recently, if you just don't look at your social media feeds, you will realize that that's not true. Actually, we have a lot more in common than we think, we do. So I guess a final question for all three of you, because we're about
1 minute.
Don't look at the clock. Don't look. We're going to ignore that for 5. Right, Greg? You're going to give us 5 more minutes? Thank you. So I guess the final question I have for all of you is, how do we use cultural diplomacy, shared values, in this moment in time that feels so difficult to find commonalities? How would you do that? So whoever wants to go first.
I think it's important to travel. I always, when I go to California, I grew up in the South, and I go to California, and the misperception of people in California and Washington State about people in South Carolina and Georgia is significant on both sides of the equation. And so I hope that I love cultural exchanges. I've spoken to many of the cultural exchanges of young rising political leaders that have come from other countries here to the United States. I've gone and done women democracy efforts around the world. Having that moment to sit down and talk to people about the clothes that they're wearing, the artwork that might be in the restaurant that you're visiting, the special item that was that one thing they made a decision to bring to your country as a gift to you because it meant so much to them. Taking the time to really understand and ask questions about it, that's when you get to know people.
Well, I would say through education. I was an internally displaced person and a refugee and an asylum seeker. Of course, it was thanks to Wabash College in Indiana, which gave me a full scholarship, and then Georgetown University gave me another scholarship, enabling me to get an education. And then I ended up becoming an ambassador for both sides before even, formally becoming an ambassador. And I think that's a long-term investment to be made and should be made by all countries, especially those with the resources. In the United States, I think one of its core strengths is the ability to provide these scholarships for foreign students, especially for students from war-torn countries in the situation that Afghanistan is or Palestine is and others, so that students come here and interact with other youth, other young students, live with them, study with them, and then talk in the class. Of course, we all read books and assignments and research and whatnot, but it's good to have someone from those countries. And that's why when I was at Wabash, my professors would always call on me, how did you do it? For example, I worked on the street as an IDP to support my family. We used to live in a camp, and I had to sell this man's underwear, buying for about 60 Afghanis and then selling for 120 to support my family. which I learned here by taking one of the courses later on at Georgetown with Lawrence Yonovich, who served as senior advisor to James Wolfenson on microfinance and microcredit and micro entrepreneurship. And I found out that I was this micro entrepreneur, having worked on the street as a street vendor. And the faculty would often ask me to give live examples. And as a result, so much happens, I think, when we invest in the education of others overseas and bring students and their families, and then they go back, some stay, get jobs, naturalize, and then again take back so much of the United States to those countries and vice versa. And then also supports is another way, as we know, it's a peacemaker and multi-ethnic context, such as Afghanistan, as some 40 plus different ethnic groups with some 5 major ethnic groups. So unfortunately polarized, especially given poverty, foreign interference, and whatnot. But sports is one where different Afghans of different backgrounds have come together through soccer, through cricket, even in South Asia. I mean, Pakistanis and Indians don't see eye to eye, but when it comes to cricket, they have some of the best games for Indians and Sri Lankans. And by the same token, we know that as we speak, the relationship between Iran and the United States, but Iranian athletes have always come to the United States and exchanges have happened, and Americans have directly heard from Iranians living under the Islamic Republic versus Iranians as diasporas. So supports and education, those are the two that I also I've benefited and also promoted as as a cultural diplomat, but later on as a professional, as a traditional diplomat, which is state to state. Thank you.
So I was a teacher before I started my company, and I'm a big believer in people-to-people types of things. And one of the things that I did was I was one of the people who started something called the Close-Up Foundation. And Close-Up has brought students to Washington. But the way we did it was that, and this gets back to misunderstandings even in this country, by rooming kids from Alaska with kids from Brooklyn, or and going through an experience together, their lives are changed forever and their perceptions are changed, and it causes people to open your minds. So when I started my company 40 years ago now, we have exchanges. We take people at the mid and junior levels, and they can apply to work anywhere in the world in one of our other offices for at least 3 weeks, because we thought that was the most we could do without disrupting their lives, because then if you're married or if you have a kid or whatever, it's still doable. And we've probably, one of the things that strengthened the culture of the firm the most, I think, were the fact that that you now had people who understood when they picked up the phone and they were talking to their colleague in Beijing or their colleague in Brussels or somewhere else, that they had a better understanding, a better picture of what life was like at the other end. And you can better advise clients because you have a better understanding of the world. So I'm a real advocate for this. And I think probably a more current type of application, everywhere you look, you can see this. And right now I'm thinking about things like Seeds for Peace, which I don't know if people know that program, but it brings Israeli and Palestinian kids together, young, to go through an experience together so that at least they understand the humanity of the other side. And what could we need more than that right now? And so I think trying to be creative about these kinds of exchanges at whatever level they happen are life-changing for the people involved. It's not enough, but it's one of those things that if we could learn tolerance and we learn to respect each other's points of view, even though we don't have to agree with them all the time, that only comes from the trust you get from spending time together and really opening your ears and your heart. And so I think that that's an important part of what we could do in the future.
All right, so if you weren't taking notes, here's what to take away. More travel, more sports, more education, so study abroad. This is what actually changed my worldview. and then find a company like Marjorie's so you can go work around the world for 3 weeks at a time. I might have to call you, Marjorie.
But you know what, and just in closing, you know, I'm first generation. I'm from a very small town. And, you know, people always say, well, what made you think you can go, you know, what made you interested? When I was 14 years old, 15, I was an au pair in Austria. And I think it was the first, you know, I was a kid, but it was an experience that, you know, changed my life and made me think about the world a lot differently. And I think that's why I would encourage everybody to have an experience.
Yeah, go all around America and the world. Actually, now more than ever, you can do it. So I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you to my panel, to my friends. A round of applause, please. I also wanted to thank all the partners and Greg, my co-pilot, co-chair, co-architect. When Greg said, let's have this event at the end of the spring meetings, I said, oh, Greg, who's going to come to that? It's going to be so tiring. But it's been a palate cleanser to be here today. And so I'm really excited to see you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you to all the partners and the speakers. And let's go enjoy each other and create some more culture diplomacy.